Hello everyone! So I have a little bit of a different video for you today. I'm currently obsessed with these custom flower embellishments that I created for a recent project for Emerald Creek, and I want to share with you how I created those flowers. So let's start off with our products, and I'm going to show you here. These are two flowers that were extra that I didn't use on that layout, but I'm going to use them actually today on another layout. So there'll be a process video. If it's not up yet, it will be up soon, and it will have those flowers on a layout and the flower we're going to make. So I have two pieces of copy paper. This is just super cheap copy paper, and I folded them both in half. You need a set of flower dies. These are my favorite flower dies. These are Tim Holtz Tattered Rose flower dies. I love, love, love them, but any layered flower die or even a cut file would be fine. And you want to cut those layered flowers out of 80-pound at least cardstock, if not a little bit heavier than that. And I'm going to be using this Boho Blends lapis lazuli embossing powder. This is one of my very, very favorite Emerald Creek embossing powders, and I'm going to start my heat tool up off to the side and let it get good and hot. So I'm going to start with my small flower. It doesn't matter which flower you start with. You want to go ahead and place your cardstock onto a piece of copy paper, and then you just want to smoosh your embossing pad onto the flower. There's actually two ways to do this. So for the smaller ones, I used the technique of putting the embossing pad down on the flower, but later on you'll see with the bigger ones another way to do it. I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle on one of my embossing powders, that lapis lazuli. A couple things to keep in mind: you only want one coat of embossing powder on these flowers. You want to make sure that if you put more than one coat of embossing powder on each of these flower layers, they become stiffer and stiffer and stiffer, which is another reason to use a thinner cardstock, an 80-pound cardstock, because you want these finished flowers to be malleable. You want to be able to bend them a little bit. And the thicker the cardstock you use, or the more layers of embossing powder that you put on each of these flowers, the harder it's going to be to get that to bend them and shape them so that they have that gorgeous flower look to them and they're not completely flat. So I am using my Crystal Katana, which is a jewel picker, but I'm going to use it just to hold the wee little edge of my flower so that I can get a nice quick embossing on this. So you just want to use the heat gun until everything is nice and melted. If you're using Emerald Creek embossing powder, I highly recommend a Wagner embossing gun because it just melts the powder so much better than anything else. I also have a Ranger craft tool, but that one doesn't really get hot enough to really get a good melt on some of these Emerald Creek embossing powders. And if you've never used them before, Emerald Creek embossing powders have a little bit more, they have like more chunks in them, if that makes sense. So you have like some bigger chunky things to melt, and so you really want to have a nice hot heat tool at the ready. So for this flower, you can see here I'm pushing the flower down into the embossing pad and just checking to make sure I have a good coverage of ink. And the reason I did that is because when I was testing these out and making them to see how the best way to create them, I ended up pulling some of these petals off when I tried to put the pad onto the paper. So putting the flower onto the pad works much better for that. And I'm just going to go ahead here and do the same thing. Hit it all with that heat tool, get everything nice and melty, and then I'm setting them off to the side because I need them to dry, or not dry, cool. They're dry. I just need them to cool so that I have the ability to play with them and shape them. So next one, this is the last one. I did this video in real time and I'm not speeding it up at all because I wanted to make sure that you could recreate these flowers if you so desire. I would love to do this again with some cut files or maybe some different shaped die cuts. I think they'd be really fun with a lot of different kinds of applications. So this is our last flower, and I'm just going to go ahead and get a nice layer of embossing powder on it. I don't mind if there are white spaces. I was totally okay with that happening. I didn't need these to be perfect. You know, a flower is very rarely perfect. So even in my garden. So if it had some white spaces, then that was fine with me. But what I really, really was careful about was making sure that I only put one layer of embossing powder on to make sure that I got a flower petals that would still be able to be moved after they were dry. So I'm going to set this one off to the side to dry, and then I'm going to clean up all of my area and we'll get started creating the flowers. Okay, so I'm going to show you here how to give each of these different petals some dimension. So what I'm doing is I'm just putting my thumb in the middle and then folding these back. This is kind of a very typical way to shape flowers, and I love how just that one layer of embossing powder gives this paper enough weight and enough it has the ability to be shaped better, I think, than if these were just paper flowers. That layer of embossing powder not only adds shine and shimmer and color, but it makes these flowers want to stay when you bend them, so that's really cool. So you can see here how I'm bending each of these flowers just a little differently. So the thinner petals are getting just a little bit of a V, and then these wider petals, I'm putting my thumb in and then just curling them up and over. And you can make these in any color. I mean, if you think about the options of embossing powder, whether it's from the Emerald Creek shop or any other embossing powder, think about all the different kinds and colors of flowers that you could create. You could also do leaves, you know, if you had like a sprig leaf. So now we're going to glue these together. You need a clothespin and you need a really good glue. I am using Nuvo Deluxe adhesive because I found that the embossing powder doesn't, because of that slick surface, it can be a little tricky to get them to stick on top of each other. And you'll see here, like, I'm going to push this one down and then it just wants to pop right back up. Like, you need a lot of glue. You need a lot of glue and you need a clothespin. So you want to get all of your flower layers stacked on top of each other with all that glue. And then you'll see here I'm getting it all kind of straight and where I want it to be. And then you want to take a clothespin and clothespin all those layers together. Set them aside and let them dry. So the Nuvo glue total takes like 24 hours, but you are probably ready in about 15. In about 15 minutes you can grab the flower and it should be glued together, stick together enough that it'll be one piece and dry fine. And so once you have let that set for a little bit and gotten your flower all glued together, the last little thing that I like to do is to add some glossy accents to the middle. I don't like, for this particular application, I didn't like the way a gem looked and I didn't like the way a sequin looked, but I really wanted some kind of center of my flower, and so I found that just that glossy accent was the perfect little way to get a center on the flower. So here is some close-ups of the finished layout using those beautiful flowers I created, and then there will be another video up on my channel. It will probably go up right after this one or right before this one, showing another way that you can use these gorgeous flowers. And the one that I have coming up is a boy layout, so that's fun too. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Check out all these gorgeous embossing powders at Emerald Creek, and I will see you all again very soon. Bye.